You're sitting at your kitchen table during tax season, W-2 form in hand, realizing the government just took a massive bite out of your year. You worked late into the night, gave up your weekends, fought through stress for 12 months, only to discover that 3 or 4 of those months you were essentially working for free just to pay the government. You're probably feeling a mix of anger and helplessness, because your entire life you've been told that paying taxes is simply the price of living in a civilized society. But then you pick up your phone and see a headline about a billionaire who's actually paying a lower tax rate than you are. You watch tech moguls and real estate barons living lavish lifestyles while reporting almost zero income to the IRS. It feels unfair. You think the system is rigged. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to admit: the system really is rigged, just not in the way you think. Not because they're breaking the law, but because they're playing a completely different game with a completely different rulebook than the one you were taught in school. I'm Viet, and I've spent years studying how this game actually works. Most people think the path to wealth is working hard, earning a high salary, and saving whatever is left after taxes. But the wealthy know that earned income is the most heavily taxed money on the planet. Trying to get rich through a salary is like running a marathon with a backpack full of bricks. Today I'm going to walk you through the exact mechanism the top 1% use to opt out of the tax system entirely. The name of this strategy is Buy, Borrow, Die. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your high salary might actually be a trap, and you'll see how to apply these billionaire strategies even if you don't have $1 billion yet. Let's break down this 3-phase approach that will transform you from a tax victim into a tax strategist. To understand why the wealthy don't pay taxes, we first need to get crystal clear on how you earn versus how they earn. When you earn a salary, that money is taxed immediately before it ever hits your bank account. The federal government takes its cut, the state government takes its cut, Social Security takes its cut. You're left with whatever remains to pay your bills and try to build a life. This is exactly what financial experts call the W-2 trap. You're trading your time for money, and that money is being taxed at the highest possible rates. The wealthy don't trade time for money. They trade money for assets. And this brings us to the first phase of the strategy: buy. The wealthy don't focus on income, they focus on net worth. They take their capital and invest it into appreciating assets like stocks, real estate, or businesses. Here's the critical distinction most people miss: when you buy a stock or a piece of real estate and it goes up in value, you don't owe a single penny in taxes on that growth until you actually sell it. This is called an unrealized gain. You bought a share of Amazon for $100 and it climbed to $1,000, you made $900 on paper. The IRS cannot touch that $900. It sits there compounding and growing, completely tax-free, year after year. This is exactly why you see headlines about billionaires whose net worth jumped by $10 billion in a single year yet paid zero income tax. Because that wealth is locked inside assets, not sitting in a checking account as cash. The wealthy know that the moment you sell an asset you trigger a taxable event, so they simply never sell. They let the snowball keep rolling and growing bigger and bigger. But this raises a very obvious question that's probably scratching at your brain right now: if all their money is locked up in stocks and buildings and they never sell anything, how do they actually pay for their lifestyle? Where does the money come from for the yachts, the mansions, the grocery runs? How do they spend wealth that's nothing but numbers on a screen? This is where we enter the second and most genius phase of the strategy: borrow. This part has a way of rewiring your brain, because we've all been taught that debt is bad. That debt is slavery. But for the wealthy, debt isn't a burden. It's a tool. It's a tax-free way to access their wealth. Instead of selling their stocks and triggering a massive tax bill, they walk into a bank and ask for a loan using their assets as collateral. This is commonly called a securities-backed line of credit. The bank looks at their $10 million portfolio and says, "Sure, since we know you have the assets to back it up, we'll lend you $5 million cash at a very low interest rate." And here's where the magic happens. Loan proceeds are not taxable income. When the bank wires that $5 million into their account, the IRS sees zero income. That's $5 million in spending power that is completely tax-free. They can use that money to sustain a lifestyle you can only dream about. And on paper, it looks like they have no income at all. But you might be thinking, what about the interest? Don't they have to pay interest on the loan? Yes, they do. But the math is overwhelmingly in their favor. Say they're paying 3% or 4% interest on the loan, but their investment portfolio keeps growing 8% or 10% a year. They're making a profit on the borrowed money. They're living on the bank's money while their own money stays invested and keeps compounding. This is called positive arbitrage. They're essentially getting paid to borrow money to fund their life. Compare that to your situation: you sell your labor, pay 30% or 40% in taxes, and try to invest what's left. They're skipping the tax step entirely and keeping their wealth working for them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This brings us to the third and final phase of the strategy: die. I know that sounds morbid, but estate planning is where the ultimate tax loophole exists. You might be wondering, if they keep borrowing and borrowing, doesn't the bill eventually come due? The answer is both yes and no. When the wealthy individual passes away, their heirs inherit the assets. And under current tax law, something incredible happens called the step-up in basis. This is the holy grail of tax avoidance. Let me explain how it works with a simple example. Say your grandmother bought some stock 50 years ago for $10 a share. Today that stock is worth $500 a share. If she had sold it the day before she died, she would have had to pay capital gains tax on that $490 profit. But when she dies and leaves it to you, the cost basis of that stock is reset to the current market value. The IRS treats it as if you bought it for $500. All the capital gains tax liability that built up over 50 years simply evaporates. It disappears into thin air. You can sell that stock the next day for $500 and pay zero capital gains tax. This is how the cycle closes. The heirs inherit the assets tax-free thanks to the step-up in basis. They sell a small portion of those assets to pay off the loans taken out to fund the lifestyle. Because the basis was stepped up, they pay no tax on that sale. The debt is wiped clean and the family keeps the vast majority of the wealth, ready to start the cycle all over again. Buy assets, borrow against them, live, and die to erase the tax bill. It's a perpetual motion machine of wealth creation that completely bypasses the tax system you and I are forced to participate in. This explains why wealth inequality is exploding. It explains why the middle class feels like they're running on a hamster wheel while the wealthy seem to be taking an elevator to the top. The tax code was written by the wealthy for the wealthy. It rewards capital and penalizes labor. If you work for money, you lose. If your money works for you, you win. It's that simple. And getting angry about it won't change your bank account. What will change your bank account is understanding these rules and figuring out how to apply them to your own life. You might be thinking this sounds great for Jeff Bezos, but I can't walk into a bank and ask for $1 million loan against my savings account. And you're right. You probably can't do it at that scale yet. But the principles of buy, borrow, die can be applied by anyone who shifts their mindset from consumer to investor. The first step is to stop prioritizing paying off low-interest debt and start prioritizing accumulating appreciating assets. Most people are obsessed with being debt-free. They throw every extra dollar at their mortgage or their low-interest car loan. They think this is the path to freedom, but by doing that they're trapping their equity in an asset they can't eat and can't spend. They're killing their liquidity. A wealthy person would never pay off a 3% mortgage early. They'd take that extra cash and buy more assets. They'd put it into an index fund or a rental property. They want their money growing at 8% or 10%, not saving 3%. They understand the concept of opportunity cost. Every dollar you use to pay down cheap debt is a dollar that's not out there working for you in the market. Let's look at home ownership through this lens. For the average American, their home is their biggest asset, but most people treat it like a piggy bank they're trying to fill up. The smart strategy is to treat it like a bank you can borrow from. As your home increases in value, you can use a home equity line of credit to access that cash tax-free without selling the house. You can then use that borrowed money to buy another rental property or fund a business venture. You're borrowing against your asset to buy more assets. You're creating your own mini version of the buy, borrow, die strategy. Instead of using your income to pay off debt, you're using debt to expand your wealth. This requires a massive psychological shift. You have to stop being afraid of debt and start respecting it as a tool. There's good debt and there's bad debt. Bad debt is borrowing money to buy things that go down in value, like cars, clothes, or vacations. That's consumer debt and it will keep you poor forever. Good debt is borrowing money to buy assets that go up in value or generate income. Good debt makes you rich. The wealthy have almost no consumer debt, but they carry massive amounts of investment debt. They're leveraged. They control huge amounts of assets with relatively little of their own cash. There's another way to apply this through your investment portfolio. If you have a taxable brokerage account, you can apply for margin privileges. This allows you to borrow against the value of your stocks. Yes, this comes with risks, and you need to be careful about margin calls where the bank forces you to sell if the market drops. But used conservatively, it's a way to access liquidity without triggering taxes. Instead of selling stocks, you borrow against your portfolio. Your stocks stay, your growth continues, and you avoid the capital gains tax. The trap most people fall into is the liquidity trap. They keep their money in cash because they want to be able to get to it. But cash is a terrible asset. It loses value to inflation every single year. The wealthy hold almost no cash. They hold assets. And because they know how to borrow against those assets, they have plenty of liquidity without holding cash. They've realized that in a modern financial system, access to credit is just as good as having cash in the bank, but it allows your net worth to grow much faster. This brings us to the concept of phantom income versus phantom debt. When you work a job, you have real income and real taxes. But when you own assets, you have phantom income, which is appreciation you don't pay taxes on. The wealthy maximize phantom income. On the flip side, most middle-class people have phantom debt. They carry liabilities like car leases and subscriptions that drain their wealth but don't show up on a balance sheet as traditional debt. You need to flip this equation. You want to accumulate assets that generate invisible tax-free growth and eliminate the lifestyle liabilities that drain your cash flow. Let's also talk about the role of inflation in this strategy. The buy, borrow, die strategy is actually a massive bet against the currency. When you borrow money, you're shorting the dollar. You're borrowing dollars today that are worth a certain amount and paying them back years later with dollars that are worth less due to inflation. If inflation is 3% a year and your loan interest rate is 3% a year, the real cost of that loan is zero, you're essentially getting free money. The wealthy use inflation to erode the value of their debts while their assets rise in price with inflation. They're winning on both sides of the equation. The middle-class saver is losing on both sides. Their cash savings are being eaten by inflation while they aren't carrying the kind of good debt that gets cheaper over time. They're swimming upstream while the wealthy are floating downstream. You have to stop trying to save your way to wealth. You cannot save your way to wealth in a fiat currency system designed to inflate. You have to invest your way to wealth and use leverage to amplify those returns. I know this sounds risky, and it is risky if you don't know what you're doing. Leverage cuts both ways. If you borrow money to buy assets and those assets drop in value, you can get wiped out. This is why the wealthy also focus heavily on risk management. They diversify. They have cash reserves. They don't over-leverage. They use debt strategically, not recklessly. You need to build a solid foundation before you start layering on leverage. You need that emergency fund. You need that steady income stream. But once you have the foundation, you have to stop playing it safe and start playing it smart. One of the most practical steps you can take immediately is to look at your retirement accounts. 401ks and IRAs are great, but they have limitations. You can't easily borrow against them. The wealthy often build massive taxable brokerage accounts specifically because of the flexibility they offer. A taxable account allows you to apply the buy, borrow, die strategy much more effectively than a retirement account where the government sets all the rules. If you're maxing out your 401k but have zero liquidity in a brokerage account, you might be locking yourself into a rigid system that limits your options. Think about the concept of tax drag. Every time you pay tax, you're losing part of your compounding engine. If you lose 30% of your gains to taxes every year over 40 years, that doesn't just reduce your wealth by 30%. It can reduce your final net worth by 50% or 60% because of the loss compounding on that tax money. The buy, borrow, die strategy is ultimately about eliminating tax drag. It's about keeping 100% of your capital working for you 100% of the time. It is the most efficient wealth building method that exists. You have to change your identity. You have to stop seeing yourself as a worker and start seeing yourself as a capital allocator. A worker tries to increase their salary. A capital allocator tries to increase their assets. A worker tries to pay off debt. A capital allocator tries to manage debt. A worker is afraid of the IRS. A capital allocator uses the tax code as a roadmap. The system isn't going to change. The government isn't going to fix this for you. If you wait for the laws to become fair, you'll be waiting forever. You have to learn the rules of the game as it's played right now and play it to win. The beauty of this is that it doesn't require you to be a genius. It requires discipline and patience. Building the asset base required to make this work takes time. If you have $500 in your portfolio, you won't be able to borrow against it tomorrow. But if you spend the next 10 years aggressively buying assets instead of buying liabilities, you'll eventually reach a crossover point. You'll reach a point where your assets can support your lifestyle. And when you reach that point, you never have to sell. You never have to pay the tax man. You will have achieved true financial freedom. Don't let the fear of debt keep you poor. Don't let the obsession with income blind you to the power of assets. Start small. Buy your first index fund. Buy your first rental property. Keep buying. Never sell. And when you need cash, learn how to access it without triggering a tax bill. This is the blueprint. This is how dynastic families have kept their wealth for generations. It's not a secret. It's just math. And now that you know the math, you have no excuse to keep playing the game the old way. Your future self is counting on you to stop working for money and start making money work for you. The tax code is a system of incentives. If you do what the government wants, investing and building businesses, you get rewarded. If you do what the government doesn't prioritize, simply working a job, you get taxed. Align your financial behavior with the incentives of the system. Stop trying to swim upstream. Build your arc of assets and let the current of compound interest carry you to wealth.